This how China became the secret force behind US retail. Hey everyone, welcome back to the World Tech Guide channel. Now, if you've ever walked into a Walmart, Target, or just scrolled through Amazon, you've probably noticed something. A lot of the stuff you're rebuying says made in China, and here's the thing, it's not by accident. China didn't just become a player in US retail overnight. And the story behind how it happened is far more complicated than just cheap labor and factories. Today, we're diving into one of the most interesting and important economic stories of the past few decades, how China became the backbone of US retail. From the shelves at Walmart to the endless pages of Amazon, Chinese manufacturing powers a huge chunk of what Americans buy every day. So, how did this happen? What's at stake for us as consumers, businesses, and workers? And with rising tensions between the US and China, what does the future look like for this relationship? Stick with me and let's unpack it all. If you like what you hear, hit that subscribe button and let's dive right in. Alright, let's rewind the clock. China wasn't always this global manufacturing giant. In fact, for much of the 20th century, China was isolated from the rest of the world. It wasn't until 1972, when President Nixon made his famous visit to China, that the doors started to open. Suddenly, the US and China started talking to each other after years of silence. Then, fast forward to 1979, China and the US formalized their diplomatic relations under President Jimmy Carter. But the real economic boom in China started with Deng Xiaoping, who took the reins of China in the late 1970s. His reform and opening up policy started shifting China's economy from agriculture to manufacturing, and that's when things got interesting. By the 80s and 90s, China had become a magnet for foreign investments, and American companies were quick to see the opportunity. Big brands like Nike, Apple, and Gap saw China as the perfect place to set up low-cost production lines. And by 2001, China joined the World Trade Organization, WTO, which opened the floodgates for even more US companies to outsource production there. So, why China? What made it stand out as the place to source goods for US retailers? First, labor costs were a huge factor. China has over 1.4 billion people, which means an abundance of cheap, hard-working labor. Back in the early 2000s, factory wages in China were a fraction of what they were in the US or Europe. This made it an attractive option for labor-intensive industries like textiles, toys, and electronics. Second, China's infrastructure. The country poured billions into its ports, highways, and factories. Places like the Pearl River Delta became massive manufacturing ecosystems where everything from raw materials to finished products could be processed and shipped out quickly and efficiently. And don't forget about government policies. China was incredibly welcoming to foreign businesses, offering tax breaks, subsidies, and relaxed regulations. All of this made China the ideal place for US companies to outsource their production and keep costs down. Fast forward to the rise of e-commerce, and China's role in US retail only deepened. Platforms like Alibaba allowed Chinese manufacturers to skip traditional importers and go straight to US consumers, making shopping easier and cheaper for everyone. Let's talk about where China really dominates. You'd be surprised how deep China's influence goes. Electronics. China is responsible for most of the world's smartphones, computers, and electronics. Apple assembles iPhones in China, and major electronics brands rely on Chinese suppliers for semiconductors and other critical components. Apparel. China is the factory behind fast fashion giants like Shein and Zara. The US imports a huge chunk of its clothing from China, over 40%, keeping prices low and shelves stocked with trendy items. Toys. Every holiday season, you can bet China is behind much of the toy shipments to US stores. China controls over 80% of the global toy market. Furniture and home goods. Whether it's at Walmart or IKEA, Chinese-made furniture and home goods fill U.S. stores year-round. But here's the kicker. It's not just about volume. It's about speed and efficiency. China has perfected the art of scaling production to an insane degree, which is why it's so hard to compete. Now, let's be real, this situation isn't all rosy. While China's rise has brought us cheap products and low prices, it's also come with some major downsides. For consumers, on the plus side, we've gotten used to paying less for stuff. We save money on things like clothes, electronics, and household goods, and this boosts our purchasing power. For companies, U.S. companies have profited big time. With access to China's cheap manufacturing, companies like Walmart and Amazon have been able to offer incredibly low prices while raking in huge profits. But here's the problem: jobs. The flip side of cheap imports is the loss of millions of U.S. manufacturing jobs. Between 2001 and 2018, trade deficits with China cost 3.7 million jobs in the U.S. This left many people in the Rust Belt and other industrial areas without work, contributing to rising inequality. And then came the trade war. In 2018, President Trump slapped tariffs on $360 billion worth of Chinese goods, sparking a massive back and forth that dragged on through 2020 and beyond. The tariffs raised costs for U.S. businesses and consumers, forcing companies to rethink their supply chains. Some moved production to places like Vietnam or Mexico, but let's be honest, China's manufacturing expertise is hard to replace. Even though the trade war had some temporary relief, China's exports to the U.S. haven't slowed down as much as many expected. In fact, the U.S. is still heavily reliant on Chinese goods, despite efforts to decouple the two economies. Looking ahead, the relationship between the U.S. and China is at a crossroads. With geopolitical risks like tensions over Taiwan, it's hard to predict what will happen next. The U.S. is trying to reduce its dependence on China by reshoring jobs and building new trade partnerships, but full decoupling, that's unlikely. Instead, the future of U.S.-China retail may be about balance. American companies will likely continue to diversify their supply chains, but China's role as the global manufacturing powerhouse will remain. So, here's the bottom line. China's rise as the backbone of U.S. retail has transformed how we shop, how companies operate, and even how our economy works. While it's brought cheaper goods and convenience, it has also created challenges that we can't ignore, especially when it comes to jobs and dependence on a foreign power. What do you think? Is the U.S. too reliant on China, or can the two economies continue to coexist? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. If you found this video insightful, don't forget to hit that like button, share, and subscribe for more in-depth stories like this. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.